I come to the conclusion that the use of force is required to stop Iran's ongoing nuclear program because the other options have failed, are failing, and will fail. But let's start with the option of Iran actually having nuclear weapons. I think if you had to predict now, that's the most likely outcome. That's probably what's going to happen. And I think within the administration and indeed within the commentariat around Washington and in Europe, there are a lot of people who think that that's entirely within our power to deal with, that we can contain and deter Iran as we did the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Former CENTCOM commander General Abizade has said as much. I think that's flatly wrong. I think once Iran gets nuclear weapons, we are in danger on a worldwide basis. And even if you believe, I think contrary to fact, that Iran could be contained and deterred, Iran isn't the end of the problem. The real difficulty with that analysis is that Saudi Arabia will get nuclear weapons, probably Egypt, probably Turkey, possibly others, so that within a 5 to 10 year period you'll have a half a dozen nuclear countries in the Middle East playing three-dimensional chess with one another in a multipolar nuclear environment, almost guaranteeing a nuclear exchange at some point or another. So the only way to stop that outcome, it seems to me, is to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. It is not an acceptable option that is the end result. Now, the most likely, or the most often turned to, and certainly the policy endorsed by the administration, is the incentives and disincentives policy, negotiations and sanctions, carrots and sticks. If I ever had anything to do about it at the State Department, I would ban the phrase carrots and sticks, because it passes for analysis. And frankly, that's what we've been doing for 7 years. And I think that's why it's important to understand the Obama administration policy is nothing but more of the same from the Bush administration.
When the Israelis will say that there's problems in Iran's enrichment, at the same time, I doubt you'd find many Israeli strategists who want to wait until the Iranians completely resolve those problems before moving forward, which is what I was talking about before with the politics of procrastination. A lot of people do talk about Russian sales of advanced anti-aircraft weaponry to Israel as being one of the trigger points. To Iran, I'm sorry. But with regard to my Freudian slip then, one thing I do want to point out, which I do think plays into some of the situation and discussions that occur in Israel, is the large degree of Israeli wishful thinking and the history of Israeli wishful thinking with regard to Russia and Russian intentions. This is one of the reasons why the Israelis were so anxious in an embarrassing sort of way to cut the Georgians loose when Russia invaded Georgia back a year ago last summer. Unfortunately, I do think there will be a time when Israeli strategists wake up and realize that the red lines can't shift much further, and that time might be rather sudden in coming.
I'm glad Michael introduced the question of the S-300. These are sophisticated air defense systems that the Russians agreed to sell to the Iranians but have not delivered. And that's another example of the benefit of diplomacy, that the Russians have held up the delivery of those aircraft systems, and it's not coincidental. It's partly Israeli, it's partly American, it's partly Saudi efforts, but that has been so far successful. I think the red line for the Israelis would be what happens to that low-enriched uranium.
Yeah, we need to get out of the fantasy that we have a real handle on what Iran's program is. People confidently assert that Iran has X amount of low-enriched uranium. Well, they have X amount of low-enriched uranium that's been declared to the International Atomic Energy Agency. Is that all they have? We don't know. We don't know. Have they enriched any of it beyond 3.5% of the U-235 isotope? We don't know. Do they have facilities, redundant facilities other than Qum? We don't know. Do they have facilities that have the second-generation centrifuge, which is between 5 and 8 times more efficient than the original AQCon P1 design that are already spinning somewhere? We don't know. Where exactly is their weapons design program? How much work are they doing on the high explosive shaping at the Parchin artillery facility? We don't know.
Just to comment before I answer the question, comment on what John said. Of course, since we don't know what we don't know, the Israelis presumably don't know what they don't know, and they can bomb the facilities that are known, but they can't bomb the facilities that aren't known, and so therefore it's another problem with bombing. I'm not a military expert, but I think that Israel, unlike the United States, is a small power that has to take into account a lot of factors that we don't always need to take into account. One of which is international legitimacy, and Israel was created as a result of an act of international legitimization in the United Nations.
There are two levels to your question. First is dealing with the non-proliferation regime, and the second is dealing with American national interest. With respect to the non-proliferation regime, it has been an incomplete house from the outset. And there are states like Pakistan as well as India and Israel that never signed the NPT as non-nuclear weapon states, and therefore, to the extent they have a nuclear weapons capability, they're not violating any treaty obligations because they never undertook them in the first place. And all of those people who over the years have said we have to finish the NPT and get everybody else to come in as a non-nuclear weapon state, I think have been dreaming. That was true after India and Pakistan had their exchange of tests in the late 1990s, and the Clinton administration response was they should both give up their nuclear weapons capability, pass the CTBT, accede to the NPT, and then be non-nuclear weapon states. It was never going to happen. It wasn't going to happen for India. It wasn't going to happen for Pakistan. It wasn't going to happen then. It's not going to happen now. The NPT, in that sense, has failed. And that is a major problem for everybody who thinks that the NPT was the answer. And that's not going to change anytime in the near future.
The argument about using force is it'll buy you 2 to 3 years. It's buying time. It's still the same objective, it seems.
But it's a very different circumstance. You're buying time for Iran now to continue its nuclear weapons program. I'm talking about buying time with the nuclear weapons program in ruins.
Well, that's the nuclear weapons program that you know about, but as you pointed out, there are things we don't know.
True enough, and the danger now is that the Iranians are so far along that we have lost the military option.
Ambassador A and Ambassador B. I know I put Michael Rubin in between the two of you. You must let each other finish.
The voice of moderation here will get his word in.
Why don't Martin, why don't you go ahead and finish?
Now, or shall I?
No, you finish, please, and then Michael.
Okay. So, fair enough, in the sense that John has now, clarified the question in a very important way. And if buying time is merely buying time for the Iranians, then obviously it's a bad diplomatic strategy. So I would certainly not advocate for that kind of strategy. But if it's buying time in terms of, in effect, stopping the clock on Iran's progress towards acquiring nuclear weapons-grade material, which is what this diplomatic dance is about at the moment, then it's buying time in terms of slowing down Iran's march towards nuclear capability. And that is worth doing. And that's what it's about.
Everybody knows how this works, at least those who know the IAEA. And what worries the Iranians is not the professionalism of the IAEA inspectors. It's they fear we know more than they know that we know. And in fact, it's been a consistent pattern over the past 7 years, while all this diplomacy has been going on, that it's been intelligence breakthroughs and the revelation of some of this information in public that's caused any movement on Iran's part at all, not diplomacy. And that, with all due respect to Martin, that's why this whole approach of more diplomacy is wrong. We've had 7 years of it. When do you have an exit strategy from failed diplomacy? When does that happen?
Well, we've had seven years of one kind of diplomacy by administration that did not value diplomacy.
That's simply
and 1 year
not
of different
right.
diplomacy.
We've had 7 years of EU diplomacy.
Well,
the
we're not talking about EU diplomacy.
Of course we are.
We're talking about U.S. diplomacy.
No, let me explain. It was known from the outset that the EU was negotiating on behalf of the United States. We knew it, the EU knew it, and Iran knew it. And everybody knew that if Iran changed its policy, it would have a different relationship, not just with the EU, but with the United States. So that was always on the table. And it wasn't the absence of a U.S. voice at that table. The Europeans were prepared to make every concession they could think of to make this work. And it didn't. And it won't work now either.